Off we go. Welcome, everyone, to How Can American Labour Defeat Authoritarianism with Sara Nelson. This is the second session of our strategy series for 2025-2026. My name's Sarah Woolley. I'm the General Secretary of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union and also the President of the General Federation of Trade Unions. The 2025-2026 education programme has over 90 courses online and residential this year, so make sure you book your place now for one of those courses that you've been putting off. Last year, all the sessions from this series, like last year, all the sessions from this series will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so if you have missed any, then you can catch up on them. And this series is strategy is not just a word. Strategy is about how we all within the trade union and wider labour movement build the power and the capacity to improve workers' lives. The employers have strategy, the managers have strategy, and it is vital that as a united labour movement, we build our own. And this series includes discussions from leading thinkers on reviving the trade union movement, how we build union strategy, the role of women and feminist approaches to our unions, strategies for developing activists, and the capacity to win campaigns big and small. Before I introduce Sara properly, the way that this call works is that it's a webinar, which means you can see us, but you can't see each other. Feel free to use the chat throughout the call, but to ask questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And then once Sara's done her presentation for about 30 minutes, I'll ask you questions directly to her. So without any further ado, Sara Nelson has served as the International President of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, so it's AFL-CIO, since 2014, representing 55,000 of aviation's first responders of over 20 airlines. She has been a union flight attendant since 1996, where she started flying at United Airlines. And Sara designed the successful payroll support programme that was an historic workers' first relief programme that kept aviation workers connected to their paychecks, healthcare and other benefits for 16 months during COVID pandemic, while banning stock buybacks and dividends across the industry and capping executive compensation for 2 years after the relief period ended, making aviation the only industry not to grow in inequality during the pandemic. Wow. Sara believes Labour should set the agenda every time. Absolutely. The New York Times called this is amazing. I feel so honoured to be on the call with you, Sara. The New York Times called it America's most powerful flight attendant for a role in helping to end the 35-day government shutdown. In Style magazine placed her on their top 50 badass women list. And the New Yorker did a major profile in 2022. And there is so much more. There is so much more. It's truly an honour, Sara, to be joining, for you to join us this evening. And I just can't wait to hear what you've got to say. So I'm going to shut up now and pass over to you. And Sara, you are very welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Sara, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to this educational series. And also, I just have to say, I just want to reiterate that it is so important that unions are conducting educational sessions like this because we have a world to win and we need to be much better organized to do it. And we can make good decisions together when we have good information. So it's really, really important to do this. And I also want to center us on strategy, as you said, because, and people may laugh at this, but Sun Tzu said, strategy without tactics is the slowest road to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And you're right. There is a strategy that is conducted by the corporate class, by the owner class, by the capitalists, all around the world. And I want to really note that I'm here not just as a union leader in the United States, but I think in terms of labor, we have to recognize that there are no borders. It is a multinational corporate class that is trying to extract as much as they possibly can from labor everywhere. So we have to be organized together around the world. And that is especially why I'm so excited to join you tonight. So I just want to back up just a little bit and frame up where and how I learned really the way that the forces work in this world, and why we have to fight back against them. So I am a 30-year union flight attendant, as Sara said. And when I started flying, I was going to be a secondary English teacher. And I was coming out of college facing student loan debt, trying to figure out how I was going to get healthcare, trying to figure out how I was going to get a paycheck, all of those things. And someone suggested, a friend of mine had been flying with United Airlines, and she told me about the contents of the contract, although she didn't put it in those terms. She talked about the pay and the flexibility and the healthcare that was negotiated by women. So it actually covered healthcare for women, and a pension that I could get so that I could retire at an early age. And so I got in my car the next day and drove 5 hours to interview at United Airlines and became a flight attendant. I got out on the line after 7 weeks of unpaid training and started to make my way. My parents were not talking to me because I had just gone through a very expensive college. And they didn't talk to me again until they got the flight benefits 6 months later. But anyway, so I was trying to make my way on no money in the bank, and was based in Boston, had a very expensive apartment. I'm sorry, well, everything was expensive in Boston. It was a very small apartment for 7 of us to share, expensive to us as new flight attendants, and started my flying career. And a couple weeks in, my roommates got their paycheck and I did not get my paycheck. So I went into the office to ask someone to help me. And they said, people get their paychecks at different times for different reasons. We're sure you'll get it next time. And I'm thinking, I have to wait another 2.5 weeks for a paycheck. But I didn't say anything because I was a brand new flight attendant, knew I could be fired on probation at that time, and tried to make it through. Very difficult on no money. And I'll just say the right to food is a real thing. So, so right, Sara? So anyway, I struggled, and the next time around that a payday came, I didn't have a paycheck again. So I went into the office, and now I'm practically in tears. My rent is due the next day. My roommates are counting on me. I can't survive. And I get some of the same rhetoric from the person behind the desk. You get your first paycheck at different times for different reasons. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is what it feels like to be a number in a human resources file. That's all I am to these people. And I started to lose it, and the tears started to roll because I was desperate. And I had this tap on the shoulder, and I turned around, and there was someone standing there who looks a lot like me. I had never seen her before, though. I remember her wings that she wore with our uniform and her union pin right above it. And she's asking me how to spell my name. And she hands me a check for $800. And she said, number 1, you take care of yourself. And number 2, you call our union. And I got my paycheck the next day. But I always tell everyone that I learned everything I needed to know in that moment when she was standing in front of me. Because as in our unions, we're never alone. And through our unions, we can make the most out of the care that we have for each other and do something about it. So I got very involved, and I would just say it's important to talk about these origin stories as organizers. This is what we have to do. We have to understand each other right away, because the boss has chosen who is in our workplace, but we have the common conditions that we have to fight against and put in check. So we've got to know each other and understand each other's stories, and understanding our differences and our commonalities, which at the end of the day create our demands. So I started doing work with the union because the union had helped me. And about 5 years into my work, September 11th happened. And it was my flight that I worked all the time that was crewed by my friends, Flight 175 at United Airlines, that slammed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center in New York. And all cameras were trained on that site because American Airlines Flight 11 had hit the North Tower 17 minutes earlier. And so it was, I know the moment that Amy and Michael and Amy and Catherine, Al, Alicia, Robert, Marianne, and Jesus died. I know what it was like to come together with my friends and have to try to make sense of that and grieve, and then see the furloughs that came after that, the redundancies, and know after the fact, after going through painful bankruptcies where these careers, the careers that I drove 5 hours to interview for, were destroyed, that pension was taken away. We had to pay more for our health care. Our pay was massively cut. The work rules that we had negotiated since 1946 were taken away. The 8-hour day that had been fought for by workers around the world and started May Day was taken away in that bankruptcy. And so, and you can hear somebody's getting medical help right now. So anyway, somebody's getting help somewhere. But I learned very painfully over a period of 3 years that while we were grieving, there were crisis capitalists thinking right in that moment how they were going to use this crisis to redefine the value of a flight attendant, a pilot, a mechanic, a gate agent, how to outsource jobs in the kitchens, and the people who were taking the baggage at the front of the airport, and the people who were pushing the wheelchairs, so they could outsource those and have the lowest paid jobs without any benefits. That's what they were planning from day one. And so it was through that experience that I learned what Mother Jones, the great organizer of the United Mine Workers and an organizer against child labor 100 years ago, crisscrossing across the United States, organizing workers and telling them, the capitalists say there is no need of labor organizing, except the fact that they themselves are continually organizing shows us their real beliefs. The capitalists want the most amount of labor for the least amount of money. Labor wants the most amount of money for the least amount of labor. And we should be proud of that, because as there are innovations, that should go in our pockets too, not just the corporate class. She said, labor built the world's palaces and created all of its wealth, but workers neither spend that wealth nor dwell in those palaces. If you would only understand that you hold the whole solution in your hand. If, for example, every worker in every industry were to simply hold up and stop working, the capitalists would yield to any and all demands because the world could simply not go on. She was talking about a general strike, but what that really talks about is fundamentally that we have the power. Together, we have the power. We always hear about the rich and powerful. That is a con job. They have money and they've taken control. They don't have power. If we wake up to our power and decide to use it together and act, there is not a single thing that they can do. In their boardrooms, they won't get their lunches. In those who want to build rocket ships to go to the moon and leave the rest of us on a burning Earth will not get there if they don't have engineers creating those rocket ships, or pilots to fly them, or flight attendants to staff them. The world cannot work without working people. And so we do need to set the agenda every single time. But we need to understand very clearly what the forces are against us and why they are against us, to fight against us, because capitalism only wants to extract profit. And it will keep doing that. It will keep eating things up, even if it goes to eat itself, because there is no humanity in capitalism. We, as the trade union movement, are the only check on multinational capitalism that exists around the world. We are the only check. And so we're the only hope, but we're also a great hope because we are the vast majority of people around the planet. And when we understand that social justice is directly tied to economic justice, and when one worker is mistreated, when there is an injury to one, there is an injury to all, and we organize with that kind of urgency and that kind of principled solidarity, we can win. So I will just share with you some of the ways that we have won. And it is first recognizing what the Union Buster will do. The Union Buster will use 4 Ds, and we have to call these things out. We have to recognize what they are: divide, delay, distract, and demoralize. And the 4th D is the worst of all, because that means we give up. We can never give up. The other thing that Mother Jones said is she said, you must fight and win, fight and lose, but you must fight. You cannot win if you do not fight. But we're talking about fighting smart. So how do you fight smart? You first define the issue. Sometimes you have to define the issue by getting reports in the workplace about a contract violation or something that has gone wrong. You write up those reports, you might file a grievance, you may enforce that contract. That's sort of a one-off example of defining the problem. You can't move forward with a solution until you define the problem. You can have a grander scale definition of the problem. We fought to get smoking off of airplanes and beat big tobacco, beat a major force in our economy by defining the problem of secondhand smoke, people getting sick and getting cancer and dying. And we had to define that problem in order to get to the demands that we have of getting smoking off the plane. The second step after defining the problem is setting your demands. And setting your demands is generally quite easy. The union busters will try to distract us on this. They will try to say, yeah, but what about the trans question? What about the immigrants who are taking your jobs? What about the women who didn't used to have these jobs and now they're threatening your manliness, men? There are all kinds of things that they will use to try to distract us from defining our demands and setting our demands. And the demands are quite clear. Lower the energy prices, extend the healthcare system to everyone, make sure that everyone can eat and everyone can have a roof over their head. It doesn't matter who they are. And let's recognize that if you are attacking immigrants, then you are also attacking the healthcare system, because the majority of people who are doing the work as doctors and nurses are immigrants. Okay, so all of this goes together, and we are the ones who can make these connections. But if we set those economic demands and fight against austerity, the Labor Party has lost its way completely. And this is another thing that I just want to note. Politics, electoral politics, that is never going to be where we solve problems, because the corporate class is always trying to buy the political system, and they will always be able to outspend us. They will always be able to have more corporate lobbyists. They will always be able to put up their candidates. It's hard to run for office, as we know, but it's easier when you have the means to be able to do something like that. So it's much more likely that you're going to have lords than commoners, right? So we have to recognize that the electoral politics, the politicians, that's important that we engage there. It's important that we put up our candidates, but that is never, if we are focused on that, as opposed to organizing, as opposed to building power in our workplaces, we are missing the boat, because we have to attack exactly where the control is right now. And that is with the money, that is with the corporate class. So organizing in our workplaces is the only way to fix our politics. We cannot look to politicians. We can't count on politicians. Even if you elect the most labor-friendly politician, you have to back them up with the continual demands for them to make good on the promises to the people that they represent. And the only way that we can do that is by organizing through our unions to have enough power to demand that. And also to put the people in check who will fight against those leaders, the corporate institutions who will fight against those leaders. So it is critically important that we are organizing to build power, that we are building solidarity, that we are understanding that, yes, organizing is getting on the ground and relating to the workers who are there and helping those workers feel heard and have real rank and file organizers who can identify directly and are not just speaking about this in terms of academics, but actually understand the struggle of the working people in that craft. But what I will tell you as the president of the Flight Attendant Union, and we are a craft-only union, is that I cannot be the president that flight attendants want me to be if I am not working with the pilots and the mechanics and the gate agents and the bakers and the machinists and the computer programmers. I cannot do my job because, as Mother Jones said, the capitalists are always organizing, and they are always organizing and sharing with each other how you can take more and more from the working class. So this is a working class struggle across the board. And that is why we have to come together no matter what our jobs are. We have to be smart about the organizing, but no matter what our jobs are, we have to spread the word of solidarity. An injury to one really is an injury to all, because it is a slippery slope for all of us to fall down. So the next step after setting your demands and being very clear about that and sticking with those demands is backing up your demands with what you're willing to do. Now, obviously, that is the question of, are you willing to strike? Because fundamentally, that's our power. But we can actually be smart about how we're exercising that power. So if all workers are organized and engaged, it doesn't matter if I say to the flight attendants, tomorrow it's going to be Talk Like a Pirate Day, and they do their announcements all in a pirate accent. If management sees that and they see that the workers are organized, the threat of the strike is there. Because they know that we're united, they know that we're talking, they know that we're communicating, they know that we are acting as one. And that is what makes the bosses tremble. So we can think about the different tactics that we use when we are organized in order to back up those demands. And I'll give you another example too. Our union was designed a strike tactic that, of course, is legal under the Railway Labor Act, the law in the US that covers rail and aviation workers. That law provides for intermittent strikes. So in the US, you may know, it's very hard to strike. But when you get to the right to strike, we also have the right to strike for 20 minutes, a couple days, and then return to work. And if they cannot replace workers during that time, then they have to accept the return to work. So we determined after a failed strike in the late 1980s, where the corporation replaced all of the flight attendants, and flight attendants then got hired back as the scabs went to other jobs, or they needed to fill the jobs. But it took 5 years to get those flight attendants back on the job. They lost the strike, they lost their union, they lost in their contract. And so we knew that we had to be smarter than the boss. We couldn't go by the same playbook for the strike. So we created a strike that's called Chaos, Create Havoc Around Our System. And we used it based on the intermittent strike strategy. But we added something that drove the bosses crazy. We said, we're also not going to tell you when or where. And I know that this may conflict, but just think about it in terms of being creative. And we were working within the laws that we had. You have to think about it in terms of the laws that you have. So we added this element of surprise. And we announced that we were going to strike, but they wouldn't know when or where. Bookings fell off 20% just because of that. And people were still going to work, still getting a paycheck. Then management had managers flying around ready to jump into action if the flight attendant suddenly struck. Well, what happened after a couple months was that the managers said, this is really hard work. You really should pay the flight attendants more, and you should give them better work roles because this is really hard. So they called everyone back into the offices because it was backfiring on management. So we're still going to work, getting a paycheck, but this is having an effect on management. Finally, when they thought that we weren't going to strike, we did. And we only struck one flight. And then we struck 2 flights. And then we struck 3 flights. And in every case, it was pandemonium. It was as if it was a rainy day. And I mean, it was less than that. But they couldn't stand that we were taking control of the operation. They can't stand losing control. So what ended up happening was they settled that contract over a fax machine. This was in 1993, over a fax machine. They said they didn't want to meet. They didn't want to talk about it. We ended up with 60% raises for the flight attendants and a whole bunch of other provisions. because they didn't understand even what they were signing. They were so out of their minds. They wanted to get control again. But you know what happened? That was the worst labor management relations in the airline industry at the time. And what that led to at that airline was the best labor management relations, because they understood the power that we had and the power that we had to act. And they did a risk assessment every day from there forward. The CEO would not make a decision without calling the flight attendant union president to ask her what she thought. There was an element of respect that came from beating the hell out of them. And so I will say, sometimes you have to beat it out of them. Sometimes they just have to remember the beating they're going to take if they don't deal with you fairly. And we have to understand that when we're organized and that threat stays there for them, that actually you can have fairly good relations. You have to be ready for the moment that it's not, and let them know that that threat is always there. So you have to be constantly organizing, but you can have them making that risk assessment right up front, get quicker deals, get things done faster. I do want to touch also, Sarah, on the payroll support program that you talked about in the introduction, because following from 9/11 and our experience there, and all of the changes to our contract and the austerity, 20 years of austerity that followed, we, when COVID hit, were not going to go back again. And instead, what we decided to do was to set the agenda from the beginning. Now, we understood that the crisis capitalists were going to be looking to take advantage of this crisis. We were not going to let them. So we put forward a plan that was a workers' first plan. And we made the airlines come to us and negotiate with us outside of the political process. So once again, not looking to the politicians, but making sure that we are actually negotiating with the people who are deciding what the politics will be. And we made the airlines have to come to us and agree with us on the principles of that relief plan in COVID. And so it was that the paychecks would continue, that there could be no cuts to pay for the workers, and continuing the paychecks also meant that we stayed connected to our healthcare, because you have to be employed in the United States to have healthcare. We also continued to get our retirement contributions, and we continued to pay local taxes that supported teacher jobs and firefighting jobs and other jobs in our communities. And we stayed current with our certifications so that when the demand returned with air travel, we were able to go right back to work. So the other controls that we put on it, though, was we said, we know how this works. In a crisis, you always say that managers could go somewhere else. So we've got to give them a bonus. We got to pay them more. We know what you're up to. So we're going to cap your pay, and we're going to ban stock buybacks, money that should go to the workers that's shoveled out every quarter to the shareholders. And they came to those terms. The one term they would not agree to, and they fought like hell to get stricken from the law at the end, was the agreement that they would not spend one federal dollar on union busting. That is what they cared about. They were willing to cap their pay. They were willing to allow for a period of time banning stock buybacks. They would not agree to not try to bust the union. And think about that. The federal dollars, all it said was that you can't spend federal dollars on this, and they would not agree to that. So a couple things about this. It's just really important to know that the union is the biggest threat to this group. We can't ever think about short-term gains. We have to think about the long game of being here and creating that threat by organizing together, having each other's backs, coming out for each other's fights, and showing management. Because when we go to someone else's picket line, our managers are looking at us to say they know how to fight. And if they're willing to come out for someone else's fight, they're sure as hell going to fight for themselves. So not only were we helping other workers lift the standards over here, but we're giving a bigger risk assessment to the bosses in fighting any of us. So in that crisis, a lot of times people will think, oh no, it's a crisis. We're going to lose things. There is always a talk of austerity and crisis. But because we set the workers' agenda, we were able to achieve this in a political process in a matter of 2.5 days. And so I think about that in terms of all of the crises that we're facing, including the climate crisis, and the fact that we're not, that the far right is trying to keep us from taking any action on the climate crisis because they see this as another opportunity. If it gets bad enough and we're choking for air and dying for clean water, then they know that we will accept less because of those 4 Ds: divide, delay, distract, and demoralize. And getting to that demoralized place is where people in desperation will accept something they never would have accepted before. So if we're not ready to act on these big issues and setting the agenda, then we're never going to get there. We're also not going to bring anyone with us because they're not going to understand the importance of the union or the importance of being a part of solidarity, or the real actions of being against immigrants, of being against refugees, of being against women, of being against anyone who for who they are or who they love. These are all simply tactics of the boss to keep us distracted and divided from staying focused on our demands. And our demands are for everyone. They're economic demands, but they're for everyone. And everyone plays a part in making those demands work. I think about the minors and the gays taking on the corporate class together, the unlikely allies, but very likely if we understand that our fight is the same, our enemy is the same, and we've got more in common than anything that can ever divide us. So this is how we approach this. And finally, the crisis adds urgency. So as we define the problem, set our demands, back up our demands with what we're willing to do, we look for those moments of urgency where if we are organized, we can pivot quickly and use the power that we have in our organization in order to get real gains on our demands. If we don't have those demands out there, if we are coming to the middle and acting as though the union is sort of part of the HR department, a business unionism, where we are sort of conceding and allowing for moderate changes, and we don't have clear global demands for better lives for all people, then we are going to continue to erode ourselves. And I will also just note that it is really important. I encourage everyone to watch this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the US and the UK have a currency. The government issues that currency. They cannot run out of money. Okay? So we are oftentimes the corporate elite will use the deficit myth as a reason to club us over the head when they may be willing to spend, unlimited amounts of money on war, but no money on making sure that everyone is fed. We have to understand the farce that exists there. And it's not as though there's no constraints, but you can spend to lift up an economy, or you can spend and give everything to the rich and push everyone down and have it be worse. And so what we're talking about is driving an agenda that has those government dollars or currency coming to us as working people and not just going to the filthy rich. And so these are the principles that I have learned through this activism in our union and working with other unions, building up the power of solidarity where we can act quickly and understand each other's fights and come out for each other, understanding that when we gain something too, what we need to do is set the competition to the highest standard, not to the lowest standard. You have to lift the floor to raise the roof. And so that's what we can do together when we are being strategic, defining the problem, setting the demands, backing up those demands with what we're willing to do, and doing it urgently. I'm so excited to take your questions and work with you in solidarity forever.
Oh,